I'm Dr. Charlotte Pence, Director of the Stokes Center for Creative Writing, and today I am with Neema Avashia, who is going to read to us one of her stories, History of Guns, from her excellent collection, Another Appalachia, Coming Up Queer and Indian in a Mountain Place. Welcome so much, Neema.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So what we're going to do here is I'll hide my camera and just have you read your story, and then we'll come back on together and we can talk a little bit about how you crafted this essay and just some of your thoughts about the essay too. Sound
Perfect.
good?
Sounds good. Sounds great.
Okay.
A history of guns. 10. The number of guns in my neighbor's gun rack on Pamela Circle. On occasion, after our post-school snack of pickle sandwiches and pudding cups, his son and I took them out of the cabinet in his den. We huddled in the wood-paneled basement, stroked the burnished metal on the barrels, ran our fingers over the honeyed grain of the stocks. These guns, antiques made and used 100 years before my parents set foot on the tarmac at JFK after their first transatlantic flight, held me in their thrall. They were beautiful, majestic, something to collect the same way we hoarded the Indian head pennies and arrowheads we found on our walks in the woods. Something I knew would never be found in my immigrant parents' home. Guns were too American for our nerdy, Gandhi-loving family. I might turn them in my hands, wrists slightly bent by their heft, for brief moments on lazy afternoons, but I knew they would never be mine. 9. The number of years I've been teaching the Second Amendment to my students in Boston and trying to explain its continued relevance in this era of extreme gun violence. I try to be the bridge between red and blue. I channel my West Virginia roots and neighbors to conjure the pro-Second Amendment arguments, but my Massachusetts liberal students are born and raised in an echo chamber, and many have seen the impacts of gun violence firsthand. They have a response every time. We need the Second Amendment to prevent government tyranny, I say. And kids say, have you seen what's happening in Syria? Guns don't stop tanks and bombs. I say, we need the Second Amendment because people love to hunt. And kids say, you couldn't eat a deer killed by an AR-15. Every bite would be full of shrapnel. I say, we need the Second Amendment for personal protection. And kids say, you don't need an AR-15 to protect yourself from a home invader. And though I grew up with guns, though guns did not frighten me when I was a child, I too read the Boston Globe every day, watch the homicide count in my city tick higher and higher, and think, they are right, they are right, they are right. 8. The number of miles between my house and Camp Virgil Tate, a massive span of grass and woods where I learned to fish and identify edible plants like sumac and milkweed and spot poison ivy and shoot a bow and arrow and load, aim, fire, reload. Holes riddled the edges of the paper target. Stalks of hay flew off the bale it was pinned to, but my aim never improved to the point where I even hit the outer circles of the target. Unsurprising, coming from a kid who couldn't cut with scissors, jump rope, or draw a straight line to save her life. Unnecessary, too, for a vegetarian with no intentions of hunting. And yet, there is this part of me that feels that I have failed, that the inability to accurately load, aim, fire, reload is further proof that I am an imposter in this place where I was born, but I'm never quite sure I belong. 7. The number of minutes from my house on Pamela Circle to the spot on Goff Mountain Road where my father dropped off the squirrels and rabbits he lured with peanut butter and trapped in metal cages to prevent them from destroying his garden. I'm taking them to Goff Mountain College, he told me. Someday you'll go there too. Meanwhile, our backyard neighbor sat on the grass in the evening shirtless, with a rifle perched between his legs. The squirrels and rabbits that entered his yard got shot, not trapped. Last year, when a squirrel, I named him Simon, invaded my house, waking me each morning with his gnawing of wood, covering my porch with his urine and feces, leaving pieces of pizza crust on the railings, I found myself filled with unexpected murderous rage. I knocked him off the railing once with a broomstick. He fell 2 stories, hit the ground with a thud, and then blithely scampered away. I explored trapping, but learned that wildlife traps are illegal in Massachusetts. And, inexplicably, I began to think about my neighbor and his gun. I, vegetarian, Hindu, raised as a pacifist with terrible aim, fantasized about shooting Simon. What would I look like sitting on my back porch in Boston, a gun perched on my lap, waiting for the squirrel to scurry onto the scene? Please don't, Laura said. You do that here and someone's going to call the police on you in minutes. 6. The number of chambers in the pistol my down the street neighbor, just out of high school, used the night he played Russian roulette and lost, sending a bullet slamming into his own brain. I was in middle school at the time. He once helped us build a deck off the side of my friend's clubhouse, a hodgepodge of plywood and wood scraps brought home from the lumber company his dad owned. Compared to my scrawny self, he was a big kid with a hammer, and I still see him straddling the beam, hammering away at a piece of plywood, a white baseball cap on his head, cradling the tender brain that would implode just a few years later. 5. The number of minutes away I was from Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh on October 27, 2018, when a gunman entered the sanctuary, murdered 11 people, and injured 6 more. In town for a 50th anniversary celebration of the creative writing department at Carnegie Mellon, I spent those morning hours locked in a basement on campus, my mind completely taken up with questions about who was at the synagogue that day. Which professors, which neighbors from my time living in Squirrel Hill, which expat West Virginians now living in Pittsburgh might be affected. We tried to carry on with the reading. I awkwardly shared the story I'd planned to read all along, one about a nighttime outing with young people where we used graffiti to grieve the loss of their peers to gun violence. Wondered at its wild inappropriateness or its fitting appropriateness for this painful moment. I called Laura during a break to tell her where I was, to explain the shelter in place. She asked me, "Love, are you okay?" I did not know how to answer her, how to explain that my body and brain still have not adjusted to an America where guns outnumber people, where guns are not Indian head pennies or arrowheads, but rather weapons of a war we wage on each other. 4. The number of times we practice containment each year at my urban middle school in Boston, once per term. We perfected the routine: close the blinds, lock and cover the door, place a green sign in the window if all students are accounted for, a yellow one for missing students, a red one if anyone is injured. Text the administrators a picture of the class attendance. Huddle in the corner, jam between the sink and the garbage can, with 28 adolescents desperately trying to keep quiet, or 24 adolescents trying to stay quiet, and 4 farting, burping, and doing anything they can to get their peers' attention. My students have so many questions about these drills. Would we really stay locked in the room if we heard gunshots? What would we do if the shooter came through a side door? What about the rooms whose doors do not lock? Aren't we teaching potential school shooters in our midst all our strategies and plans by practicing these drills again and again? 3. The number of shots fired at Angel, the sweetest of students, just 15 years old, killed on a street corner in South Boston at 11:30 p.m. 4 Novembers ago. The 4th beloved young person to die by gunshot that year. The 4th funeral I attended where I outlived the person in the casket by a full 2 decades. He baked me a fruitcake at Christmas the year I taught him. 2 shots to the head, 1 shot to the neck, 0 the number of times I want to hear, see, or touch a gun again. Thank you.
Thank you, Neema. That was fabulous. And I just want to reiterate again that this is from your recent book that has, gosh, it's received so many fabulous awards. I'll name a few, so you don't have to be the one who does it, but the New York Public Library Best Book of 2022. Book Riot for Best LGBTQ Memoir, and of course, finalist for the 2022 New England Book Award and the Lambda Literary Award finalist as well. So congratulations on all of that.
Thank you.
So where was this essay in the writing of the book? Like, was it one of the first ones you did, middle, end? When did
That's a good question. It was not in the beginning. I think that it, this collection, I started writing it in 2016. And so some of the essays that started to come up later were the essays that were coming up in response to sort of what I was seeing happen in our country, which was this like very intense polarization that started probably before 2016. It's been around for a long time, but that felt intensified in 2016 and continues to feel really intense now. And this essay, I think, was trying to get at this experience that I've had a lot as somebody who doesn't live in Appalachia anymore, which is being in this position of living outside of Appalachia, but being able to see why people in Appalachia might think the way they do and why that might be different from the way that people in Boston think about an issue. And so, like guns is a topic that I think is one of those issues that polarizes. And I knew that I had had all these experiences with guns, that guns were a part of my life the whole way through, that as a child, like I was very familiar with them. I was around them. They didn't scare me. But that the longer I lived in Boston, the way I felt about guns or the way that I experienced them in my reality as a teacher was that they weren't a hobby or they weren't a toy. They were being used to cause profound harm to
Right.
people who I loved. And yet, like, none of those experiences with guns necessarily in and of itself stood as a full essay. So this sort of like list essay let me take all those experiences with guns and think about how could I organize them in such a way that there would be a narrative arc, that over the course of these vignettes you would see an evolution in my sort of understanding of this issue or in my feeling about guns through sort of detailing and documenting these sort of tiny moments in my life where guns have been so salient.
But that makes a lot of sense about form and content are coming together here. So it's a segmented essay with the number. It's like a countdown, right?
Mhm.
And I can't help but think of sometimes there's a countdown before a gun goes off.
Right.
Um, but also what you're saying is that your opinions about guns and how guns are used, it's it changes based on like where you've been in different parts of in different times of your life, different parts of the country. This hasn't always been a static experience for you.
No, not at all. And I mean, I think we really undersell how geography shapes our
Mhm.
identities and how geography shapes our perspectives. And I think very rarely in this conversation about guns is geography surfacing in the conversation. That like living in the heart of a city like Boston, how someone understands guns, what role they see them playing, whether guns make them feel safer or less safe is going to be radically different than someone who lives in a very rural place where they might be quite isolated, where there's, like your protection really does feel like it is on you because there's
That's
not
right.
necessarily something else that is protecting you. Um, all of those things are shaped by our lived experience, right? But
Right.
but very often when we're having this conversation, all that lived experience isn't really coming into the room. Like it's a theoretical argument or it's people in their corners sort of fighting from their corner without surfacing that like some of the fundamental differences in how we see these issues is because of geography and
Absolutely.
culture and sort
Mhm.
of like that. I think is part of what I'm trying to lay bare here is that the culture around guns was radically different where I grew up than it is where I live now. And I can see why people fall where they fall in it, right? I can understand that as a product of geography and culture. Um, and I can kind of try to lay bare how, like, as I move further away from the geography and culture of my childhood, and I'm in this other geography and culture as an adult, like, I feel my own self shifting,
Right.
because the experiences I'm having now are very different from the ones that I had growing up.
Yes. Yeah, that all makes perfect sense. And it's interesting how you even say in the essay, I try to be a bridge between the red and blue. And I think that's often how this politicized topic is often framed, Republican versus Democrat, liberal versus conservative. And I love how you're saying geography, place. That is also a huge part of this. And maybe even could be a part where there's a little bit more understanding or common ground where it could be found. Do you feel like narrative itself can help with some of that like the politicization?
I hope so. I mean, it's kind of all I think we have left right now.
You
It
might be
makes
right.
I mean, it makes me sad to say that, but I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know where else. Like, people are trying so hard to make us not seek each other and not
Mm.
have empathy for each other and not seek solidarity one another. Like, it just feels like that is the political strategy right now. Whether someone's on the left or the right, if you're a politician in this moment, you're not preaching solidarity, you're preaching polarization because you think polarization is what gets you elected. So if our leaders aren't sort of like actively trying to bring us together, then narrative feels to me like the only place where that can potentially happen. Where like you might read something about someone who's very different from you, who comes from a different place than you are, and maybe through that reading, it gives you some insight that you didn't have before. And that insight creates a little bit more grace inside you for that person's experience. And like that grace is what allows us to sort of slowly move into more shared space. That's sort of all I can hope at this point. It's part of what I feel like I was trying to do when I wrote this book. I felt like people where I live now didn't understand people where I grew up and didn't extend a lot of grace towards them, and in fact were really condescending and pretty disrespectful. And yet like I would put, you know, every dollar I own on the people I grew up with. Like those are the best people I know. They continue to be the best people I know. And so how could I show people here what they were missing? Narrative was the only way I knew to do that, right? You're either going to come home with me physically, or I'm going to take you home through a book, and I can take a lot more people home through my book than I can take home physically.
That is a great point. And it's such a good point. We will just go ahead and end on that. I encourage everybody who is dipping into this video to please check out Neema's book, buy it. Do you have a preferred bookstore that you would like people to go to?
Your local independent bookstore is always the right place to go to get a book.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Neema.
Thank you.